Everybody has a story, right? A story that has 3 chapters: your past, your present, and your future. Food has played an important role in that story, as you probably know. It has shaped your past, it's editing your present, and will continue influencing your future. I'm not talking about fiction, I'm talking about your genomic DNA, the owner's manual that you were born with. A page of your genomic book reads like this. It looks like a computer code, isn't it? Even after so many years studying genetics, I'm still amazed at how these plain-looking sequences of 4-letter combinations can make us. A copy of your genomic DNA sequence contains precisely 3.2 billion letters, and we have trillions of those copies to keep us functional for a lifetime. In order to accommodate that amount of data, your cells have to be very organized. Your DNA is densely packed into 23 structural entities that we call chromosomes. You have 2 sets of those. One set is from your father, and the other set is from your mother. Your genes give instructions to your cells to make your proteins, and your proteins will follow a precise blueprint to make your body and define your biological traits. For example, on your chromosome 16, your version of gene HER2 determines whether you have brown eyes or blue eyes. And genetic variants we found on chromosomes 1 and 3 will influence how sensitive you are to the sugar levels in your candies or Coke. Your taste receptors for bitterness is also very complex. We have found a number of genetic variants on chromosome 7 that will influence how you perceive the bitter molecules in your food and impact what foods you like and don't like. Umami, the secret of smart chefs, right? Humans developed taste receptor genes to detect the nutritional values in foods. Umami gives us an important signal to survival as it senses amino acid, which usually implies broken down meat or protein, foods that convert to energy. So these are only a peek at hundreds of nutritional genetic factors that scientists like myself have identified in the last 3 decades. We have begun to understand how foods have influenced the makeup of our DNA and how can we use that knowledge to help each individual to develop his or her unique needs for nutrition, health, and wellness. So you may be wondering, like I have before, what has happened, right? And how has food influenced our genetics in the first place? Now, let's travel back in time a little bit. So our genetic, back here. Our genetic ancestors, modern human, left Africa about 50,000 years ago. The total population then was estimated to be 250,000 only. So that small density of population means our capacity to develop into a more stronger and more evolved gene pool was very limited. Beneficial genetic variants happen occasionally, but it will take them thousands of years to stabilize and spread out. At a slow rate, human genes have evolved. Between 100,000 to 10,000 years ago, humans became far more creative than their ancestors. They knew how to use fire and make tools and became better at hunting. Now we have evidence, DNA evidence, showing that humans became innovative when they picked up the genes for speech and developed speech gene and pick up genotype to develop bigger brain. So they became better thinkers, knew how to take bigger risks by analyzing complex situations to better predict outcomes. So when the last ice age ended about 15,000 years ago, a revolution that changed human history forever. And as you probably know, that is agriculture. agriculture changed us dramatically, not only because it changed our food environment forever, but also changed the pace of our genetic and social evolution forever. So between 50,000 to 3,000 years ago, human populations grew from 250,000 to 60 million. Now, when the genetic variants happened now, it took very much shorter time to stabilize and spread out. So as the result, we have identified millions of genetic variants by sequencing the DNA of 2 individuals. Much of the diversity that we see in the genetic blueprint was caused by the foods that your ancestors were exposed to. Agriculture not only impacted human nutrition and genetics. The explosion in population led to new ideas and innovations. And innovative societies were far more successful and competitive than those not. Domestication of animals led to new kinds of infectious disease that human biology has to develop to handle. Stationary lifestyle enabled the creation of wealth and elite classes for the first time, which was not possible when we were mobile foragers. Our perspectives around food, as shown here, also changed. Instead of spending all this effort to acquire food, we became masters of preserve, store, prepare, and enjoy food. Let's take a closer look at how exactly a new food introduced by agriculture has changed billions of people's genetics today. Our body is highly efficient at managing energy. When the product of a gene is not needed, to save energy or turn it off just like we switch off a light. The expression of lactase, the enzyme that enables the baby to get high energy from the breast milk from the mother, is controlled by this energy efficiency program. In humans, we usually lose that gene expression when the breastfeeding is over. However, today, approximately 30% of the adult population of the world will have the lactase gene turned on all the time. The reason is about 3,000 years into cattle farming, 4 regions, including Northern Europeans, develop a mutation so they can digest lactose to get the high additional calories from milk. Whereas my ancestors, who have been living on rice for all these years, did not need to develop the mutation. This makes me and my son lactose intolerant. As you probably can imagine, that is a big bummer when living in Wisconsin. So this collision between the genetic predisposition and the food environment we're living in has caused the mass suffering of our the suffering of our society. I'm glad that Nancy this morning touched upon these figures. So very briefly, 2 out of 3 American adults are either overweight or obese. 1 out of 3 kids are either overweight or obese. There are over 100 million Americans that are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. 90% of the pre-diabetic cases are undiagnosed. All of these can be reversed by proper nutrition. With our long-established understanding that 30% of our health status is determined by genetics, we urgently need a solution to provide individuals personalized nutrition recommendations to better management of the health and wellness. So can we do that, right? The question is, we want to help everybody with quality, very personalized solution, but can we deliver that with quality at scale? The answer is yes, and we're doing that already. The reason is the cost of the sequencing a human genome has dropped 1 million times since we finished the Human Genome Project in 2003. Now, for the price that you would pay for a pair of good running shoes, we have a way to genotype anyone who wants to find out his or her predisposition for nutrition, health, and genealogy. The science behind personalized nutrition based on genetics is called Nutritional Genetics. It's our growing understanding into the impact between the differences between the two individuals in their DNA and how these differences are linked with their differences in their bodies, responses to dietary intake, health status, and disease risks. So I have studied obesity with the late Dr. Ahmed Kasiba, whose work has contributed tremendously to our understanding of obesity, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. Our work, 25 years long of an obesity study, contributed to our understanding in the field how much of a trait such as weight is determined by genetic factors in contrast to environmental ones. And we have published our work in obesity journals for the components that are determined by genetics for human metabolism. Recently, other studies have shown that even eating behavior is determined genetically to a large degree. We're talking about preference for food, timing of eating, and so on and so forth. So eventually, my research led to the creation of the innovations that drive the GenoPalate technology today. In a nutshell, we investigated more than 100 genetic biomarkers for personal nutrition and eating, more than 50 genetic gene pathways for metabolism, 26 metabolic health areas, 28 nutritional domains. All of these is for one unique solution for a person. Our vision is providing and empowering individuals with personalized nutritional information based on their genetics. We'll be able to help people reach and maintain optimal health and the society reduce chronic disease. So this is how it works. We can chat about that. So
let's get into that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. So let's chat about this. Let's talk about how GenoPalate is providing this information based on our DNA. I think it's a good bookend between you and Naveen, right? Naveen talking about how the microbiome plays a role, and you talking about how the DNA and the genetics play a role. Tell me about the genetic sequence and how accurate those markers are in terms of determining something that's important. Maybe it's IBS or diabetes or some condition like lactose intolerance. I'm also lactose intolerant. So yeah. I would like to know those things. Like I would like to know those things of my kids and things like that in the future. Right. So how accurate are the results that your sequencing and your data can provide?
Your genes don't change, right? I mean, also touch upon that completely accurate. And that's also the power of genetics, right? If you have family, you know I'm talking about genetics code define your biological traits, period, right? So, but there is a gene expression, I studied that, and there's something called epigenomics and linking your genes and environment. That's exactly how some of the genetic markers as a surrogate can capture that, right? So the genetics code, for example, lactase, the lactose intolerant, it is a genetic SNP, which is a mutation naturally happen, from my ancestry versus yours, but it doesn't change, and it's very accurate at capturing that differences between two individuals.
100%, 90% accurate. Like, what if you see that genetic malformation or the SNP there that has that break? What's the likelihood that you can determine from that data that someone is going to have lactose intolerance?
It varies from case to case, but there are cases where it's actually captured more than 80% of the correlation between clinical manifestation and the genotype.
And so where are you getting all the data that's backing your algorithms? Because all these algorithms are based on having enough population across, the Asia region, the US region, things like that. So are you basing this off of existing research that's been done, or have you done a lot of primary work at GenoPalate to develop your own proprietary data and algorithms?
Yeah, ongoing it will be a mixture of all highly curated, credible studies that with adequate power to detect that tangible effect size, we call it in our study, currently is completely open access information that everybody have access to. As a trained scientist, that's really the best one source of the data because it's peer reviewed. It passed all the scrutiny of a high standard scientist.
So there's already a basis of the data collected in the industry already, or in academia and in the research world.
Government.
You're applying that, you're bringing that to the world, but every data point that you add on top of it with your studies. But I also understand that you're partnered with other providers of data collection tools like 23andMe and what's the other one that you're partnered with?
Ancestry.com.
Ancestry.com.
We'll be able to, we're not partners, just to be clear, but people own their own data. That's the beauty of it, right? And it's great that these bigger platforms actually have that open access policy for people to be able to download it with a very short instructions from GenoPalate, for example. There's multiple platforms that enable that, and then they will be able to download the raw data, which they have no knowledge what to deal with it without a PhD in genetics, right? And then we'll be able to turn that into something actionable that day.
Right. So it's great that it's not just people that have to come to your platform and use your tests. You can use other people's tests that have collected the data, and people are unlocking that data for you. And then all you have to do is give them back a report based on their previous tests.
Correct.
Yeah, that's very, very good. So I want to talk about the tests because I think this is very interesting. We talked about, Naveen, about being prescriptive or just providing the data. So how prescriptive can you be? And I'll give you an example. I pulled down one of your sample reports, and it said to me something like, you metabolize, or research has shown that people with your genetic profile metabolize caffeine quickly. And I was like, holy hell, that's awesome. Like, if I got that result, I drink more coffee. Like, so what is your responsibility in terms of the results or the data that you provide back to people? And what's your population, like, specificity telling you?
Yeah.
Like, so you can't be like, and I think this is the whole problem with this space, is you can't be prescriptive, right?
Right, yeah.
So what can you tell someone but not, and what's your responsibility to the consumers in terms of giving them that information?
Yeah, we're being regulated by the government. We cannot claim those claims we haven't been cleared, obviously. But I think it's still shaping, and we want to leading the standard for best practice in consumer genetics, especially for nutrition. And I think we need to be really take the responsibility as the scientific innovation company that provide the literacy and the faithfulness in interpreting that data from the original work, whether it's from public available or your own, to the application of people.
But you go one step further, correct? So you take that data and then you pair someone with a coach or some type of service that helps people adapt that information into their lifestyle. So talk a little about why that's important and why that's a part of this whole personalized nutrition thing, which is you can't just rely on a consumer to interpret their data and make decisions, right?
Correct, yeah. So today I have to run through a lot of slides because I want to talk to you. And there's a slide where I showed the health determinants. That's the health model, right? If you remember, there's 30% determined by genetics, and there's a 40% determined by your behavior. And 10% is actually due to our healthcare, unfortunately, right? 90% is just good luck, right? So the 40% is where actually we want to become better at. At the end of the day, you can give all the signs, whether it's a microbiome or DNA or blood or anything, but if they don't do anything onto the right track, then forget it, right? So forget about it. So what we really tailored is a 12 weeks digital coaching program, and we'll keep expanding that the content so that we can hold your hands for a period of time until you feel you know how to eat for your genes for a better life.
And we talked about this. Sometimes the harder problem is the behavior change, not knowing the data, right? Knowing the data is the first step in an otherwise very long journey to fixing your eating habits. And so it seems like that's a critical step that you guys are employing to have the outcomes that you would hope for. Talk a little bit about those outcomes. What are consumers specifically coming to you guys for? Because I can imagine it's things like weight loss or IBS treatment or preventing diabetes. But what are the core of your population today, and where do you want to go with it in terms of what consumers you want to reach in the future?
Great. That's a great question. This is a universally applicable product. Everybody, from young to old and female, male, and then that's really what we see from our user base. It's skewed towards people educated, already adopted 23andMe, and that kind of a segment of audience. But I think it's really the matter of how we educate them to take on this new concept. So the education is play a big role in that.
But what's the problem that like if some consumer comes to you, what's 9 out of 10 times the consumer's coming to you to solve what, or what information are they trying to determine?
Yeah, other than the universal use of it, the feedback from the users include, we found actually providing a DNA-based recommendations on nutrition is very effective triggering of behavior change. So that's really nice to see. For example, when people are provided with their GenoPalate report, the first thing they do is they rush to the grocery to shop for their genes, do a shopping spree based on their food list because we do provide a food map.
So it's literally just changing their buying habits and the stuff that they're going to make on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
The first outcome of this.
Yeah, and that's great, right? First, we trigger that differences, the behavior change. And the second one is people change the perspectives around food, right? One of the powerful feedback from our users. Her name is Mary, and also followed by other people. She said, finally, after 30 years of finding the best diets and so on and so forth, I finally relaxed. I'm relaxed around foods. At the same time, actually, he reached her health goals. Weight loss, weight management is one of much easier than before. So that's a powerful. And other things are including there are people knowing their gluten sensitivities based on the genes, and then take gluten out, and they will be able to see very significant differences in reducing pains and inflammation in their body.
Is allergen detection kind of one of the first things that people are looking for, is to understand their relationship to different potential allergens within their system?
Allergy is an immunological response, which is different from what we really picked up. But there's a lot of the basis behind the allergy is actually rooted from some genetic, which we can pick up.
That's great. And so one question I always like to ask my panelists or the people I interview is also to think about the future and what it takes to unlock the true personalized nutrition, ideal where we're all eating for our genes or eating, to our specific needs and health demands. What are some of the things that you still think are either underappreciated sciences or understudied sciences, or would unlock better knowledge about ourselves and what we should eat that need to happen in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think some of them is opportunity is in the integration of genetics, proteomics, epigenomic, right? We talk about RNA-seq today from the earlier discussion, and there's so many different data streams. And again, I want to hone back into the behavior changes, right? There's got to be more science of behavior and data science, and to all integrate it into one data learning engine so that we can really help the individual to the highest precision level.
Right. If they just keep going to McDonald's after getting these results, we didn't do our job, right, at the end of the day. So taking the DNA...
Not necessarily.
Yeah, taking the DNA, taking the metabolism, taking the microbiome, combining all those hard sciences, right, that are still evolving in a lot of ways. Like, we're still uncovering new DNA, markers and things like that every day, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just really exploding in the last 10 and 5 years. The nutritional genetics, right? A lot of effort into metabolism and bioavailability and so on and so forth. So I can't wait to see what's going to come in the next.
And how does that need to be tied in? I guess this is our Smart Kitchen Summit. So how does that need to be tied into our Smart Kitchen? I mean, again, it's probably a great way to end this conversation, which is like, is our oven going to tell us we need to eat, more broccoli or things like that because it's better for our health once we do our sequencing? Or what's your vision for how all of this stuff is kind of knitted together?
I see two things dreaming together with you. One is I think I would like to see our kitchen become a preventive care center for everybody, right? The mom is actually always taking care of us and dad and so on. And the food is the best mediator, right? The media to really deliver the right or wrong nutrients or substances in your body, including beverages and whatnot. Anything you eat will make differences, right? This is what I also want to share with you. Remember, every time you eat, you are writing your life stories by having a conversation with your DNA, because everything you eat will make changes, just whether you not know or you don't know or aware of it or not. So that's one. Second one is AI, right? I think, like to your earlier point, your oven's smart enough to tell you what to eat, right? Something like that, but I would push it to think about avatar, right? AI twin of yourself, right? However you want to choose that face to be, maybe your dog, maybe your son, maybe your wife, whoever can really motivate you, but with all this intelligence of nutrition in that brain, so that you can trigger your behavior change at that day, that moment, the most effectively for your good. I think that's my vision.
Awesome. Well, that's a wonderful way to end this session. So thank you, Dr. Zhang. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you.